A millionaire was about to get married, but triplets interrupt the ceremony. She hurt us. What they discover changes everything. Caleb Mercer adjusted his tie for the 5th time in front of the mirror. His hands, accustomed to firmly closing million-dollar deals, now trembled slightly. He smiled at his own reflection, a restrained smile that held the certainty that, at 38, he had finally found his place in the world. "It's almost time," said his friend Mark, knocking on the bedroom door. "Nervous?" Caleb took a deep breath. "For the first time in my life, I'm not nervous about doing something big." The guests were already in place at the church. White flowers and a red carpet marked the path to the altar. Caleb took his position, observing familiar faces in the first rows. Business partners, a few friends, all with approving looks. No one was really surprised at how quickly the relationship had progressed. After all, and when you find the right one, why wait? The organist began to play, but Caleb's mind drifted to 6 months earlier, when it all began. That night at the bar in the Marriott Hotel, he was exhausted after a meeting that ran longer than expected. He ordered a double whiskey and loosened his tie, hoping for just a few moments of silence before returning to his empty apartment. That was when he noticed the woman at the far end of the counter, Vivian Lake. The name came later, but the impact was immediate. She was sipping a martini, her black hair cut neatly at shoulder length, wearing a simple navy blue dress that somehow made her look like the most elegant person in the room. She wasn't trying to impress, and maybe that was precisely why she did. She caught him looking and raised her glass in a silent toast. Caleb did the same, and it would have ended there, if not for her phone slipping from her hand and sliding right to his feet. "I think your phone prefers my company," he said, handing her the device. She smiled. "I don't blame it." And that was it. Simple. No gimmicks. In the following weeks, they met almost daily. Dinners at quiet restaurants, conversations that flowed effortlessly. Vivian had well-formed opinions about art, politics, business. She spoke with conviction, but never arrogance. She knew how to listen as much as talk. What most captivated Caleb as he reflected on that altar was how Vivian seemed complete in herself. She didn't need him. She chose him. She had her own marketing consultancy, a busy schedule, a structured life. There were no dramas, no demands or insecurities. Vivian was too much of an adult for emotional games. "I've never seen you like this," his assistant Sandra remarked after a meeting, when he received a message from Vivian and his face lit up involuntarily. "It's like you're a different person." It was true. Caleb, the man who built a tech company from scratch, had always been described as serious and calculating. Correct, yes, but distant. In board meetings, he'd developed a reputation for being ruthless with numbers and unforgiving toward incompetence. He wasn't cruel, just practical. Life had taught him there was no room for sentimentality in business. Vivian, however, had thawed something inside him. In the 3rd week, he took her to see his apartment at the top of a modern building overlooking downtown. He cooked dinner himself, something he hadn't done for anyone in years. "I didn't know executives could cook," she joked, tasting the risotto. "I have my hidden talents." That same night, they slept together for the first time. Nothing was forced or planned. It just happened, like everything between them. Later, lying in bed, Vivian shared fragments of her life, born in Seattle, educated in Chicago, a career built with determination. She spoke little about her family, which Caleb understood perfectly. He himself wasn't close to his, having only a distant brother in California with whom he exchanged holiday greetings. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm strange for not missing a big family," he commented. Vivian traced the outline of his face with her fingers. "Some people are complete in themselves, Caleb. There's nothing wrong with that. It was exactly what he needed to hear. Someone who didn't judge him for being who he was." In the 2nd month, she accompanied him on a business trip to London. During the day, while he was in meetings, she explored the city. At night, they shared discoveries and impressions. It was there, as they strolled along the Thames River on a Sunday afternoon, that he realized he no longer wanted a life without her by his side. The proposal came in the 3rd month, a private dinner, no grand gestures or audience, just the straightforward question, and the diamond ring he'd chosen himself after visiting 3 different jewelers. "Are you sure?" she asked, her green eyes locked on his. "We've only known each other a short time." "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," he replied. "And you?" She slipped on the ring, which fit perfectly. "I'm sure, too." When they told their friends, there was surprise, of course, but also approval. Vivian won people over naturally. At dinners and events, she knew exactly what to say, when to smile, when to remain silent. His friends became her friends. His business partners respected her. Even Sandra, normally critical of his previous girlfriends, commented, "She's different, boss. Don't let her go." The next 3 months involved discreet preparations. Nothing extravagant, although Caleb could easily afford a lavish wedding. Vivian preferred elegance over ostentation. The guest list was whittled down to the essentials, 200 people who actually mattered. The church, an old building with colorful stained glass that reflected the afternoon light, wasn't the largest in the city, but it had character, just like Vivian. And now, standing at that altar, Caleb wondered how his life had changed so completely in just 6 months. Before her, his days were predictable. Wake up, work out, go to the office, meetings, more work, dinner alone or with some business contact, sleep. Repeat. He had success, but no life beyond the office. He usually planned every step in his business meticulously. Every acquisition, expansion, and hire, everything was calculated, measured, viewed from different angles. But with Vivian, it all just flowed, as natural as breathing. "She's the one," Mark said beside him, adjusting his own suit. "Here comes the woman who finally made the great Caleb Mercer surrender." The music changed. The guests stood. The church doors opened. Vivian appeared, stunning in her simply cut white dress that revealed her shoulders and showcased her natural grace. No veil, no unnecessary traditions, just her, in all her understated beauty and self-assurance, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. Caleb's heart pounded. For a moment, he thought of his empty apartment, the lonely nights, the cold decisions he made. How had someone so closed off like him managed to attract someone so perfect? People spent their entire lives looking for someone like this, someone who seemed designed to fill their empty spaces, someone who understood their silences as well as their words. She walked toward him with steady steps, a discreet smile on her lips. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Vivian knew exactly what she wanted, just as he did. Perfect, he thought, absolutely perfect. When their eyes met, Caleb felt a certainty he had never experienced before. In that moment, everything in the world was right. All those years of hard work, all the tough decisions, all the sacrifices, they had been worth it to get here, to find her. What Caleb didn't know, as he watched his bride approach the altar, was that sometimes perfection comes at a hidden price, and he would find out that price very soon. The moment was beyond perfect. Golden rays of sunlight streamed through the church's stained glass, painting small rainbows on the marble floor. The gentle scent of lilies and roses hung in the air. The rich, solemn organ music filled every space of the central aisle as Vivian glided along. Caleb would never forget this image. Vivian, radiant in her silk dress, black hair framing her face like an elegant frame around a masterpiece, her green eyes fixed on his as if no one else existed. The pastor, a bald man with a kind smile, waited with his hands clasped in front of him. Markham, as best man, nervously adjusted his bow tie. Sandra, Caleb's assistant and now maid of honor at his insistence, smiled discreetly from the front row. "She's breathtaking," Mark whispered. Caleb only nodded. Words seemed inadequate. In the front row, Caleb's business partners and the few close friends watched in admiration. The absence of family didn't bother either of them. They were self-sufficient in their own perfect little universe. 2 steps before reaching the altar, Vivian paused briefly. She smiled at Caleb, that subtle smile he so admired, meant just for him. A smile that promised stability, understanding, and a life where all the pieces fit neatly together. The pastor opened his book. "Dear friends, we are gathered here." That was when it happened. The large wooden doors of the church slammed so hard that a few women in the back rows let out startled cries. The sound echoed through the sanctuary like thunder. Everyone, including Caleb and Vivian, turned to look. Standing in the doorway were three small children, panting as if they had run a marathon. They were so alike there could be no doubt. They were triplets. They seemed completely out of place, like characters from another movie who had burst into the wrong scene. Their clothes were worn and dirty. Their faces, though childlike, held a disturbing seriousness. The resemblance among them was striking. Identical triplets, each wearing the same determined expression. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. One of the guests cleared her throat nervously. The pastor closed his book, confused. Caleb looked at the triplets, then at Vivian. He was about to gesture for one of the ushers to escort them out. Maybe they were children of a church staff member who wandered in by accident, when one of them stepped forward. "She hurt us," she said, her small voice echoing through the church in the absolute silence. "And after our father died, you left us on the street." Caleb felt a strange unease, like a distant alarm sounding in some deep part of his mind. He turned to Vivian, expecting to see confusion, maybe even concern. Instead, he saw something he had never noticed before, an instant of pure, unadulterated fear in his bride's eyes. It was only a flash, so quick he might have imagined it. Then her face shifted into a mask of polite irritation. "Caleb, can we call someone to get these kids out of here?" she whispered, trying to steer the ceremony back on script. "They clearly wandered into the wrong place." Caleb nodded, still confused. He motioned for Mark, who began to move discreetly toward the girls. A murmur ran through the church. The guests exchanged puzzled looks. An older woman in the third row covered her mouth with her hand. "Vivian?" he asked, looking at her. "Do you know these children?" "Of course not," she replied immediately. Her voice was firm, without the slightest hesitation. "I've never seen them before in my life." "Caleb, please, can we continue?" Another one of the triplets stepped forward. "You married our father," she said, each word pronounced clearly. "Thomas Whitlow." The silence in the church deepened to an almost tangible level. Caleb felt as though someone had thrown cold water in his face. He looked at Vivian, expecting a vehement denial, an explanation. Her face had become completely expressionless. There was no anger, no surprise, nothing. Like a porcelain doll. "That's ridiculous," she finally said, in a controlled voice. "I've never heard of any Thomas Whitlow." Turning to the pastor, she pleaded, "Could we please remove these children and continue?" Caleb felt something break inside him. He didn't know if he believed the kids. It all seemed too absurd. But there was something about the raw sincerity in their voices that made his stomach tighten. The entire congregation was now in total silence, all eyes alternating between Vivian and the three identical girls. "Vivian," Caleb tried again, his voice more urgent now. "Are you sure you don't know these children?" Vivian tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture Caleb knew well, something she did when organizing her thoughts. For the first time since he'd met her, the gesture seemed calculated. "Absolutely sure," she said firmly. "I've never seen these children before. This is obviously some sort of scam. Look at them, Caleb. Someone sent them here to get money out of us. You're a wealthy man. People will do anything for money." Her words sounded logical, rational. It was an explanation that made sense in Caleb's world, a world of contracts and hidden motives. For a moment, he almost believed it. "I'm Nora," said the first triplet, now looking directly at Caleb. "These are my sisters, June and Mira. We're triplets, daughters of Thomas Whitlow." A murmur of horror swept through the church. Caleb looked at Vivian, whose face now showed a mask of calculated offense. "It's unbelievable you're even listening to this," she said, looking around at the guests. "I've never heard of Thomas Whitlow. I've never been married before. These kids are lying." Vivian took a step back as if physically struck. For a fleeting second, Caleb saw something in her eyes, not just anger or indignation, but fear. "These children have clearly been coached by someone," she said, turning to Caleb. "Maybe someone who doesn't want us to be happy. A business rival of yours, perhaps. Or some jealous ex-girlfriend." Caleb looked at the three identical girls, then back at Vivian. There was something in the way they stared at her, a personal, intimate knowledge, a deep hurt that couldn't be faked. "Vivian," he said quietly, "are you telling me the truth?" "How can you even ask that?" she retorted, her voice jumping an octave. "After everything we've shared, you're going to believe 3 street kids instead of believing me." "She's lying," the triplets said in unison. A heavy silence fell over the church. The guests began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed. Another quietly stood up and left. "I think we need to postpone the ceremony," Caleb finally said, his voice low but firm. "How, you can't be serious?" Vivian hissed, grabbing his arm. "You're going to let 3 little liars ruin everything?" Caleb looked at her hand on his arm. The same long, elegant fingers he once found so graceful now felt like claws. He gently pulled away. "I think I need to understand what's going on," he said calmly. "And I think you need to leave." Vivian stood perfectly still for exactly 3 seconds. Then, as if a scene change in a movie, her expression shifted. The cold look ignited into fury. The graceful lines of her mouth twisted into a sneer. "You'll regret this," she said in a low, cutting voice. "I wasted 6 months of my life on you." With that, she spun on her heels and marched down the main aisle. The guests parted like the Red Sea. When she reached the doors, she turned one last time. "They're lying," she declared to the entire church. "And you're a fool, Caleb Mercer." The doors slammed behind her. The sound reverberated through the stunned silence. The triplets stood still in the aisle for a moment. Then, as if they had completed a mission, they turned in unison and walked toward the exit. They didn't look back, didn't ask for anything. They simply left through the same door Vivian had used moments before. Caleb stood frozen, watching the children vanish. The church began to empty, the murmurs growing louder as the guests made their way out. Mark approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, man," was all he said. The pastor, not knowing what to do, muttered something about rescheduling and disappeared into the sacristy. Sandra came over, her face a mix of concern and confusion. "Caleb?" she called softly. "Are you all right?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how to. The church emptied until only Caleb and Mark and Sandra remained. The heavy silence was a stark contrast to the anticipation of just half an hour ago. "Those triplets," Caleb finally spoke. "Where did they go?" But no one had an answer. The girls had appeared like ghosts from a hidden past and vanished just as quickly, quietly, taking with them secrets no one could have imagined until that moment. And so Caleb Mercer's big wedding day ended, not with music and champagne, but with the distant echo of slamming doors and the weight of a truth he had never asked to know. 3 days after the church debacle, Caleb parked in front of the Royal Oaks Hotel. He sat for a few minutes in his car, studying the building's classic architecture through the windshield. A light drizzle blurred the outlines slightly, as if the entire world had lost some clarity since that afternoon. Vivian had contacted him that morning. A short message, with no emojis or exclamation points. "I'm at the Royal Oaks. Room 512. Can we talk at 3? It wasn't a request. It was an appointment, typical of her. Caleb took a deep breath before turning off the engine. What would he say? What would he ask? Images of the 3 identical girls still burned in his memory. The accusation in their eyes, the conviction in their small voices, the way they looked straight at Vivian without hesitation. And Vivian, that flash of fear he'd caught in her eyes before she composed herself. That second of pure panic he had never seen in her before. Mark Echute, his best man and closest friend, had been clear. "Just end it, man. Something's really off here." Sandra, his assistant, usually so pragmatic, had said something similar. "I don't know what happened in that church in Caleb, but those girls knew who she was. What they didn't understand was that it couldn't be that simple. 6 months. Dinners, trips, late-night conversations. How could someone fake all of that? How could she not have slipped up somewhere?" The receptionist only nodded when Caleb mentioned he was going to room 512. Clearly, Vivian had put him on the list of approved visitors. The 5th-floor corridor was quiet, lit by yellowish lights that gave the dark blue carpet a greenish hue. Caleb stopped at the door, hesitated, then knocked 3 times. Vivian opened almost immediately, as if she'd been standing right behind the door. Her hair was impeccably styled, her red lipstick perfectly applied. She wore a charcoal grey business suit, an odd choice for someone staying at a hotel, Caleb thought. She looked ready for a meeting, not a talk with the man who almost became her husband. Punctual as always, she said with a polite smile. No kiss, no hug, just a gesture indicating he could enter. The room was an executive suite, impersonal and too neat, as if no one really lived there. An expensive suitcase lay closed near the closet, no personal items in sight. Even though she'd been there for 3 days, there was no trace of Vivian in the room. "Would you like something? I ordered tea," she offered, nodding at a porcelain set on the small round table by the window. "I'm fine," he replied, remaining standing. Vivian sat in the armchair near the table, crossing her legs elegantly. Caleb noticed she was wearing the same stiletto heels she had planned to wear at the wedding. "I thought you'd come sooner," she said after pouring herself some tea. Her voice was controlled, measured. "I needed to think," he simply responded. Vivian nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "That's understandable. It was a disturbing incident." Disturbing incident. The choice of words sounded strange to Caleb's ears, too cold, too distant. "Do you know those girls, Vivian?" She set down her teacup delicately, without making a sound on the saucer. "No, Caleb. As I said at the church, I've never seen them before. I'm deeply offended you'd even consider believing 3 street kids over me." The firmness in her voice was absolute, no tremor, no hesitation. "Thomas Whitlow," he said, not as a question. Vivian kept her gaze steady. "Never heard that name until that day." "Then why would they know that name? Why claim you married their father? Why say you abandoned them?" Vivian took another sip of tea before answering. The movement was deliberate, as if buying time to formulate the perfect response. "It's obviously a setup, Caleb. Someone coached them. Someone who knew about our wedding and wanted to harm me." "Who?" "I have competitors in my consultancy. You have rivals in business. Maybe a jealous ex-girlfriend. There are plenty of possibilities." Caleb walked to the window. Outside, the city carried on as usual, oblivious to the fact that his world had been turned upside down. "Street kids," he repeated her words. "Is that how you see them?" "What else would they be? Did you see their condition? They're probably homeless, trained by someone to ruin our day." Something about how she spoke of the girls. It wasn't just disdain, it was almost restrained anger, as if they had done something personal against her. "Strange that they knew so much about you," Caleb said, still looking out the window. "Your full name?" "The church where the wedding was." "That's easy information to find," Vivian replied quickly. "Our wedding announcement was in the local paper. Anyone could have accessed that." Caleb turned to face her. "And the man's name? Thomas Whitlow. That's a pretty specific name to invent." For the first time, he saw a barely perceptible twitch at the corner of her right eye. So quick he might have imagined it. "I don't know where they got that. Maybe it's the name of the man who coached them for this con." Caleb studied her carefully, the perfect posture, the absolute control. The teacup in her hand without the slightest tremble. She was the same Vivian he met at the bar 6 months ago, elegant, contained, confident. And yet, something was different. Or maybe it had always been there, and he had never noticed. A coldness in her eyes, a calculated precision in every move, as if each gesture, each word, was meticulously orchestrated. "I seem less shaken than I'd expect," he observed, keeping his tone neutral. "What would you have me do, Caleb? Break down in tears? Have a meltdown? I'm not that kind of woman, and you know it. It's one of the reasons you decided to marry me, isn't it?" She was right. Vivian's composure had always been one of the qualities he found most attractive. In a world of exaggerated emotions and unnecessary drama, she was a safe harbor of rationality. But there was a difference between being composed and being disconnected. 3 children accused us in the middle of our wedding. Vivian, they said you left them on the street. That doesn't bother you even a little. Of course it bothers me, she replied, placing the cup on the table. I'm furious they ruined our wedding. I'm hurt you doubted me. I'm offended by these absurd accusations. It all sounded reasonable, logical, perfectly articulated, But where was the genuine indignation, the confusion, the shock, the real pain? "I still want to marry you, Caleb," she continued, softening her voice. "We can reschedule the ceremony, something more discreet, maybe. Let's not let this farce ruin what we've built." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly tired. "I need time, Vivian." She nodded, understanding. "Of course, that's perfectly reasonable." Once again, everything so reasonable, so controlled. "I'll stay at the hotel a few more days," she informed him. "Then I'll go back to my apartment. You know how to find me when you're ready to talk." There was no plea in her voice, no vulnerability, as if she was simply rearranging a schedule of meetings. Caleb stood, feeling a strange urgency to leave the impersonal hotel suite. "I'll be in touch." At the door he hesitated, turning to look at her one last time. Vivian remained seated, her posture impeccable, her face a serene mask of control. "Do you truly not know those children, Vivian? Look me in the eyes and tell me the truth." She looked at him directly, without blinking. "I've never seen them in my life, Caleb. I'm the victim of a cruel setup. I hope that you, of all people, believe me." He nodded slowly, saying nothing, and shut the door behind him. In the elevator, alone, Caleb felt something unsettling settle in his chest. It wasn't exactly mistrust. It was a more subtle, disquieting feeling. A silent doubt had begun to take root. Vivian's words were perfect. Her arguments logical. Everything made sense, except for one detail. At no point had she asked about the girls. She showed no concern about what might have happened to them after they left the church. No curiosity about their well-being, about who could be using children for such a cruel con. And that, more than anything, planted the first genuine seed of doubt in Caleb. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but he'd need more than intuition to discover the truth. It had been raining non-stop for 3 days, as if the sky shared Caleb's state of mind. Sitting in his office on the 30th floor, he watched the droplets running down the window, distorting the city view. The lights of the neighboring buildings appeared as indistinct blurs through the wet glass, much like his own thoughts. A week had passed since his meeting with Vivian at the hotel, 7 days of insomnia, going over every moment of the last 6 months in his mind, searching for signs he might have missed. The phone rang, pulling him from his reflections. It was Ellen, his secretary. "Mr. Mercer, Mr. Harrington is on the line." "Thank you, Ellen. Please transfer him." Caleb straightened in his chair. Richard Harrington was more than his lawyer. He was a long-time friend, someone Caleb trusted implicitly. And now, perhaps the only person who could help him find the truth. "Richard," Caleb said when the call connected. "Any news?" "I've got some preliminary information," answered the deep voice on the other end. "I'd prefer not to discuss it over the phone. Can I drop by your office in an hour?" "I'll be waiting." After hanging up, Caleb got up and walked to the window. 3 days ago, he had asked Richard to discreetly investigate the name mentioned by the triplets, Thomas Whitlow. He wasn't sure what to expect, but his need to know the truth had become a silent obsession. He closed his eyes, mentally returning to that first dinner at Vivian's place, 2 months after they'd met. An elegant apartment in an exclusive neighborhood, impeccable minimalist decor, white walls with just a few abstract art pieces, expensive but sparse furniture. At the time, he admired the clean style so similar to his own taste. Now he realized something unsettling. There wasn't a single personal photograph in the place, no album, no object that seemed to have a history or sentimental value. It was as if Vivian's life had started the very moment he met her. "Where are your keepsakes?" he had once asked, half joking, during dinner. "I'm not sentimental," she'd replied with a light smile. "I prefer to live in the present." At the time, Caleb found it refreshing. A woman with no emotional baggage, no past dramas. Straightforward like him. Another time, during a ski resort weekend, the subject of family came up naturally. "My parents died in an accident when I was 20, she said, while they watched the snow fall outside. "It was hard, but I learned to move on." "Siblings?" he asked. "I'm an only child," she replied, quickly changing the subject. "Isn't this wine wonderful?" Caleb now realized that whenever the conversation veered near her past, Vivian deftly redirected it. So smoothly that he never questioned it. He never pressed. "Do you want kids someday?" he asked her one night after they watched a couple with a baby at the restaurant. Something had flickered in her eyes, not exactly sadness or aversion, but something more complex. "I'm not sure I have a maternal instinct," she replied with a light laugh. "What about you?" "Maybe," he said, "at the right time." And once again, the conversation slid away. The silences, the subtle redirections, the vague answers that seemed fine at the time but now, viewed under a new light, formed a disturbing pattern. Vivian was a carefully constructed mystery, and he had been so captivated by the surface that he never thought to look deeper. Until three small identical figures burst into his life, carrying accusations that shattered the illusion. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Ellen announced Richard Harrington's arrival. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Caleb said, shaking the friend's hand. Richard looked more serious than usual. A middle-aged man with grey at his temples and perfect posture, he carried a leather briefcase under his arm. "How are you?" asked the lawyer, sitting down in the chair across from Caleb's desk. "I've been better." Richard nodded sympathetically. "I have some information you need to see." He opened the briefcase and took out some papers. "It's just the beginning of the investigation, but, Caleb prompted when his friend hesitated. "But it's already enough to confirm that Thomas Whitlow existed and that he indeed had a connection to Vivian." Caleb felt his stomach drop. As much as he expected it, hearing the confirmation was like a punch to the gut. "Show me," he said, extending his hand for the documents. "Thomas Whitlow, 39, a college professor of English literature," Richard began, handing over a sheet with a photo attached. "He died about 8 months ago from heart complications." Caleb looked at the photo. A thin man with a red beard and gentle eyes smiled at the camera. Something about that smile made his chest tighten, an honest warmth. "He was married to Helen Whitlow, who died 3 years ago from cancer," Richard continued. "They had identical triplet daughters, Nora, June, and Mira Whitlow, now 8 years old." Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the impact of each name. They weren't inventions. They were real people. Real lives. "And Vivian?" he asked, opening his eyes. Richard slid another document across the table. "Vivian Lake married Thomas Whitlow 2.5 years ago, 6 months after Helen's death. It was a small backyard wedding at their home, exactly as the girls had said." "Continuing," Richard went on, his professional tone masking any personal judgment. "After Thomas died, the house they lived in was put up for sale. The real estate agent confirmed that Vivian handled the entire transaction." "And the girls?" The lawyer hesitated. "That's where things get murky. There's no official record of where they went after their father's death. They weren't formally adopted, nor did they enter foster care. But there's a police report filed by a neighbor claiming to have seen 3 small children sleeping on a park bench near the family's former house. By the time authorities arrived, the children were gone." A heavy silence filled the office. Outside, the rain continued tapping against the window, providing a melancholic soundtrack to the revelations. "There's more," Richard said, pulling out additional documents. "Vivian moved to this city a week after selling the house. She reinvented herself completely. Even her professional resume was altered. The marketing consultancy she supposedly had for years, it was registered only 6 months ago." Caleb took the documents, examining each detail: certificates, records, dates. The story of Vivian Lake, the woman he had almost married, was crumbling in front of his eyes like a house of cards. "Her parents didn't die in an accident," Richard continued. "They're actually still alive, living in Phoenix. They haven't spoken to their daughter in years. When I tried to contact them, they refused to comment about Vivian, only mentioning she had always been a problem." "She told me she was an only child," Caleb murmured. "She has a younger brother, Gabriel Lake, also estranged from her." Each revelation felt like another knife twist. The woman he thought he knew, who he believed was strong and independent, was a complete stranger. "There's one more thing," Richard said, his voice now clearly uncomfortable. "Before Thomas Whitlow, there was another man, a businessman named Martin Reynolds. They married quickly after he was widowed. Martin died 6 months later from natural causes. Vivian inherited a considerable sum. Are you suggesting she... I'm not suggesting anything, Richard cut in, just presenting the facts. Both deaths were investigated and deemed natural. Caleb rose, unable to remain seated. He walked to the window, looking out at a city now draped in darkness. Lights blinked everywhere, small signs of life, people carrying on with their routines, unaware that his world had just imploded. "And the girls?" he finally asked, without turning around. "Did you manage to locate them?" "Not yet, but I'll keep searching. Now that we know they're real, we can involve the authorities, seek official help." "No," said Caleb firmly, turning to face his friend. "Not yet. I need to find them first. I need to hear from them what really happened." Richard nodded, understanding. "I'll continue the investigation, then..." Discreetly. After the lawyer left, Caleb stayed in his office, rereading every document, every confirmation that his life with Vivian had been built on lies. The woman he thought he knew, the one he admired for her strength and independence, had abandoned 3 small children after their father died. How could someone do that? How could she just walk away from 3 vulnerable lives and start over as if they never existed? The most disturbing answer was also the most obvious. The Vivian he knew, confident, controlled, rational, had never really existed. She was just a carefully constructed facade hiding something much darker. He picked up his phone, looking at the last message she'd sent 2 days ago. "Caleb, I hope you've had time to think. I'm going back to my apartment tomorrow. Can we have dinner and talk?" He hadn't replied. And now, with all the documents on his desk telling a story so different from the one she presented, he knew there would be no more talks, no more explanations, no more second chances. Whatever they had ended the moment, 3 small figures threw open the church doors. He just hadn't realized it yet. The rain finally let up, but Caleb barely noticed. In his mind, a firm resolution was taking shape. He would find those children, uncover the whole truth, and somehow try to fix what Vivian had done. Not for her, not even for himself, but for 3 small lives that had been discarded as if they meant nothing. Deep down, he was troubled by one more question he couldn't shake. If Vivian had lied about absolutely everything, if she was capable of abandoning 3 helpless kids, who was she, really? And what else might she be capable of? It was almost midnight when Caleb realized he'd been sitting in the same spot for hours. His apartment's living room, usually a refuge of organization and control, was in disarray. Papers scattered around, empty glasses, a plate of half-eaten food. Even Caleb's usually impeccable attire was undone, his jacket thrown over the couch, tie loosened, hair disheveled. Richard's report lay open on the coffee table. Page after page telling the story of people he had never met, but who somehow were now part of his life. Thomas Whitlow, Helen Whitlow, Nora, June, and Mira. And Vivian, the version of her he had never seen. 5 unanswered messages flashed on his phone screen, all from her. The last one, sent 2 hours ago, was almost threatening in its coldness. "Your silence is becoming offensive, Caleb. I deserve at least a response." He picked up the phone, stared at the screen for a few seconds, then set it back down. How to respond to a stranger who had spent 6 months pretending to be someone else? A woman who built an entire life from scratch, erasing her past and everyone in it. Caleb stood, feeling stiff from sitting so long. He poured himself another finger of whiskey, the 4th that night, and sat back down. He wasn't normally one to drink like this, but tonight it seemed necessary. Yet the alcohol, instead of clouding his mind, only made his thoughts sharper, more cutting. He closed his eyes and let himself revisit, with painful clarity, every moment of the past few months. His birthday dinner, when she showed up with the perfect gift, a vintage watch he had casually mentioned admiring weeks earlier. "You pay attention," he said, surprised. "Always," she'd replied with that subtle smile. Now he understood. It wasn't just attention, it was study. Vivian studied him, learned his preferences, adapted to be exactly what he wanted, the perfect partner, shaped by his own expectations, or the time during a trip when her phone rang late at night. She quickly silenced the call, saying it was just her office voicemail with some message. When he asked why the office would call so late, she explained naturally about a client in a different time zone. He accepted it without questioning. Who really called that night? Someone from her former life, someone who knew her secret. And the countless times he tried to talk about the future, kids maybe someday, and she'd steer the subject so subtly he barely noticed. "Let's just enjoy our time together," she'd say, kissing him in such a way that he completely forgot his original question. She manipulated every moment, every conversation, guiding him exactly where she wanted him to go, like a master chess player anticipating moves, controlling the entire board. Caleb got up again and walked to the window. The city lights sparkled below, indifferent to his pain. Thousands of lights, thousands of lives, each following its own path. Somewhere among those lights, could those 3 young girls be? The thought made his stomach turn. That was what tormented him the most. Not the betrayal he felt, but what had happened to those children. Richard's report mentioned a police record about kids seen sleeping on a park bench. Kids, alone, in the dark. He went back to the photos included in the report. Thomas Whitlow in various settings, always with the triplets close by. In one, the girls wore matching colorful dresses, smiling at the camera as they held toys. What had happened to those toys, to those clothes, to all the tangible reminders of a father who loved them? Another photo disturbed him even more. Vivian's wedding to Thomas, in the backyard of their home, just as the girls said. Vivian in a simple blue dress, smiling at the camera with an arm around Thomas's waist. The 3 girls, smaller and younger, holding tiny bouquets of wildflowers. A family Vivian had simply abandoned when it no longer served her purposes. "What kind of person does that?" he murmured at the cold glass of the window. He recalled the look on the girls' faces in the church, not just accusing eyes that now haunted him, but something deeper, a dignity that children so young shouldn't need to have. A resilience born far too early. One detail came back to him. While everyone left the church in shock, the 3 left hand in hand, not looking back, asking for nothing, as though they had already learned it was useless to ask. And that, more than any revelations in the documents, more than any of Vivian's lies, shattered something inside him. Caleb had always considered himself a fair man, strict in business, yes, but ethical. Rational, perhaps distant, but never cruel. Now he wondered, what kind of man would he be if he turned his back on those children, knowing what he knew? The man Vivian expected him to be, someone who only cared about his own pain, who would move on, leaving the problem behind. Was that what she expected? That he be just like her? Or would he be the man his father, gone so many years now, tried to raise? A man who took responsibility, even when it wasn't technically his. "You always have a choice, son," his father used to say, "and those choices show who you really are." Caleb stared at his reflection in the dark window. The man looking back at him seemed older, more tired, but also strangely clearer, as if a fog had lifted. He returned to the table and picked up his phone. Instead of replying to Vivian's messages, he opened a new conversation with Richard. "We need to find the girls, use all the resources necessary. I want a full team out tomorrow morning." The reply came almost immediately. "Understood. I'll mobilize some trusted people. I'll call you at 7 a.m. with the plan. Have someone keep an eye on Vivian's apartment too," Caleb added in another message. "I want to know if she tries to contact the girls." "Done," Richard responded. After a pause, "You're doing the right thing, Caleb." Something shifted in Caleb at that moment. The pain of betrayal, the anger, the shock at the revelations, all of it still lingered, but now coexisted with a new feeling, a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. He couldn't change the fact that he'd been deceived. He couldn't undo the months he'd spent with Vivian, loving an illusion. He couldn't rewrite the past. But there were 3 small, vulnerable lives out there somewhere in the city. 3 children who, for a reason he didn't fully understand, had risked everything to expose Vivian and stop the wedding. They didn't know him. They had no reason to care about him. But something drove them to act that day, to walk into the church and confront the woman who had abandoned them. The least he could do was find them, listen to them, help them. He would be the man Vivian never saw, the man he himself wasn't sure he could be. Caleb put his phone away and began gathering the scattered papers. He would need rest for the day ahead. The search would be only the beginning. As he tidied up the documents, his eyes landed once again on the photo of the triplets smiling beside their father, so small, so alike, so vulnerable, and yet so brave that they'd confronted the woman who abandoned them in a crowded church. The only certainty he had, as he finally prepared for bed, was that he couldn't ignore what he'd discovered. He couldn't go on pretending he didn't know. For the first time in a long while, Caleb Mercer would sleep with a firm resolution in his heart. He would find the Whitlow triplets, no matter how long it took or how much it cost. It was the least he could do for those eyes that now haunted him. Hamilton Square looked like something out of an old postcard. Centuries-old trees formed a natural canopy over stone walkways, cast-iron benches dotted the edges, and an Art Deco fountain bubbled at the center. On weekdays, it was mainly frequented by older folks playing chess and mothers with strollers. On weekends, entire families spread blankets on the grass for carefree picnics. It was a cloudy Thursday when Caleb parked his car on the side street. The last location mentioned in Richard's report was a recorded complaint from a store owner who had seen 3 identical girls selling homemade candies without a license near the square. The man was more upset about competition than their presence. It happened just 3 days earlier. "It's our best lead so far," Richard had said on the phone that morning. "I have people checking shelters, bus stations, and other parks, but I suggest you go to Hamilton Square yourself." Caleb adjusted his coat before getting out of the car. He had intentionally chosen casual clothes: jeans, a wool sweater, comfortable shoes. He didn't want to intimidate them with his usual executive appearance. The square was relatively empty at that time. A few people walked briskly, trying to avoid the cold weather and the imminent rain. Caleb searched the main pathways without seeing any sign of the triplets. He was about to expand his search to the surrounding streets when he noticed movement under a large tree in the more secluded part of the park. He approached slowly, trying not to appear intrusive. As he got closer, shapes began to take form. 3 small figures sitting on a worn bench, sheltered under the thick tree canopy. One of them was organizing something in a shoebox, while the other 2 watched passers-by in the distance. Caleb's heart pounded. It was them, the same girls from the church, though they seemed even smaller and more fragile outdoors, without the grandeur of the cathedral backdrop. He took a deep breath and walked toward them, keeping his expression neutral and friendly. The girls noticed him immediately. The one who seemed oldest, Nora, if he remembered correctly, nudged the other 2. All 3 froze, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of recognition and caution. "Hello," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. "Do you remember me?" The girls remained silent, watching him with identical, wary eyes. They wore the same worn clothes they had at the church, now even dirtier. Their hair, all the same shade of brown, was tangled and dull. "My name is Caleb Mercer. We saw each other at the church a few days ago." "We know who you are," said the middle one, June Tellers, he presumed. "You were going to marry her." "No," Caleb said gently. "I'm not marrying Vivian anymore." The 3 exchanged quick glances, a silent communication that seemed to transcend words. It was fascinating and slightly unsettling for Caleb, like witnessing a secret language. "Why are you here?" asked the one he believed to be Nora. Her voice, though small, carried a natural authority as if she were the group's spokesperson. "I wanted to find you," he answered honestly. "To see if you're okay, to hear the whole story if you want to tell it." "Why?" she insisted. Caleb chose his words carefully. He realized these children had been betrayed by adults who were supposed to protect them. They deserved as much truth as he could offer. "Because you changed my life that day at the church. I've been thinking about you ever since. And because I believe you deserve someone to listen." The girls exchanged glances again, silently conferring. The smallest one, Mira, whispered something to Nora, who gave a brief nod. "You can sit," Nora said, indicating the empty spot on the concrete bench. Caleb sat, keeping a respectful distance. In the shoebox between them, he noticed small chocolate truffles wrapped in crumpled foil. "Are you selling candy?" he asked, trying to start a casual conversation. Yes, June replied. Our mom taught us how to make them, before she got sick. Helen, Caleb said softly. Your mom's name was Helen, right? All three looked at him with surprise. How do you know? Nora asked, her eyes suddenly alert. I found out some things. About your father, too. Thomas Whitlow. A clear sadness passed over their identical faces, like shadows moving across three small ponds. He was a teacher, Mira said softly, speaking for the first time. Her voice was the gentlest of the three, almost a whisper. English literature. Yes, Caleb confirmed. I learned that. I also learned, he hesitated, unsure how to proceed, that Vivian married him after your mother passed away. She showed up at the funeral, Nora said, her gaze fixed on some distant point, as if reliving the memory. She stayed close to Dad the whole time. Said she was Mom's friend from college. That was a lie, June added bitterly for someone so young. She never met our Mom. But Dad believed her, Nora continued. She visited us, brought us gifts. She was nice. She paused. At first, Caleb saw the three of them inch closer to each other, seeking comfort instinctively as the painful memories surfaced. Then they got married, June said. In our backyard, we held flowers. And then, Caleb prompted gently. Then she changed, Nora said. She got angry if we made noise, threw away our drawings, said Dad gave us too much attention and not enough to her. When she got really mad, Mira added in a quiet voice, she sent us to the basement. Said she needed silence. Caleb felt a wave of anger surge through him, but he kept his expression calm. These girls had seen enough anger. Dad didn't know, June explained. She acted differently when he was around. Then he got sick, Nora said, her voice trembling slightly. A heart problem. He had to go to the hospital. He came home once, June continued. He was weak but happy to be back. We made drawings for him. But then he went back to the hospital, Mira said, and never came back. A heavy silence enveloped the group. Caleb waited, giving them space to process the painful memories. What happened after your father passed? He finally asked. The three girls looked at each other again, deciding who would speak. Nora's voice remained steady despite her grief. At first, she pretended to be sad. People came by to visit, brought food. She acted like she was going to take care of us. But as soon as everyone stopped visiting, June continued, she started packing things. Said she was selling the house. Our stuff was the first to go in boxes, Nora said. Pictures of Dad, pictures of Mom, our toys, our books. We tried hiding some of our things, Mira added, but she found them and got furious. One day, Nora recalled, her eyes now bright with barely contained tears, we came home from school and the lock had been changed. Our backpacks and a few clothes were in plastic bags on the porch. She opened the window and said we weren't her problem anymore, June said, that the house was sold and we had to leave. We stayed on the porch until it got dark, Mira said. We thought she might change her mind. But she didn't, Nora finished. The next day there was already a sold sign in the yard. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the anger welling up inside him. How could anyone do this to children? To anyone, really? But especially to vulnerable children who had just lost their father. Where did you go? He asked once he could speak calmly again. At first we stayed nearby, Nora replied. We thought maybe a neighbor would help. But no one believed us, June said bitterly. Vivian told them we were going to live with relatives, that we were just making trouble because we didn't want to go. Mrs. Miller, an older lady who lived on the same street, called the police when she saw us sleeping in the park, Nora continued. But when they arrived, we ran away. Why? Caleb asked, genuinely curious. Vivian said if we went to foster care, they'd separate us, Nora explained. She said we'd never see each other again. And you can't be separated, Caleb concluded, understanding. All three nodded at once. So you stayed together, surviving on the streets? We moved far from our old home, Nora said. We learned that places like this are good. There's a public bathroom, a fountain with clean water. People sometimes leave food. We make candy and sell it, June added. A lady at the bakery on the corner lets us use the oven in the back after they close, if we sweep the floors for them. We're fine, Nora concluded, raising her chin with a pride that broke Caleb's heart. We take care of each other. Caleb looked at the three girls in front of him, so small physically, yet so immense in courage and determination. Now he understood why they came to the church that day. It wasn't revenge, it was protection. They were protecting him from Vivian just as they protected one another. "How did you find out about the wedding?" he asked. "How did you find us?" "We saw it in the newspaper," June answered. "The bakery lady sometimes gives us old papers to use when it's cold." "We recognized her in the photo," Mira said. She was smiling like she was nice. "We couldn't let her do to you what she did to our dad," Nora explained simply. A lump formed in Caleb's throat. These children, who had lost everything, cared enough about a stranger to risk themselves. They exposed themselves to save him from a fate they didn't even fully understand. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved me that day." The three gave shy smiles, the first he had seen since finding them. A drop of rain fell, then another. Soon it would be pouring. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" Caleb asked, glancing at the darkening sky. Nora hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "We have a place," she said vaguely. "Under the park bridge," Mira added, earning a sharp look from Nora. Caleb made a decision at that moment, a decision he knew would change his life forever. "I have a proposal," he said calmly. "My apartment has a guest room that's never used. It's a safe, dry, warm place. There's food in the fridge and hot water for showers." The girls looked at him warily. "Why would you do that?" Nora asked. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. "And because I want to help." "We don't need charity," June said, pride evident in her voice. "It's not charity," Caleb corrected. "It's help, like what you gave me in the church." The three looked at each other again, that silent exchange. The rain was picking up, creeping through the tree's canopy. "Just for tonight," Nora finally said. "Until the rain stops?" "Just for tonight," Caleb agreed, knowing it was only the beginning. Caleb's apartment had never felt so alive. The sound of small footsteps and children's voices echoed through the normally silent halls, filling spaces he never realized were empty. The girls entered timidly, gazing around with a mix of awe and caution. Caleb showed them the guest room, spacious, with a queen-sized bed and a pull-out sofa he quickly set up. "The bathroom's over there," he indicated. "There are clean towels in the cabinet and—" He hesitated, realizing he didn't have children's shampoo or any kid-friendly items. "We can use any shampoo," Nora said, guessing his thoughts. "We're used to it." That simple comment made Caleb's heart ache. Children shouldn't be used to adapting. They should have their needs met, their preferences considered. "I'll find you clean clothes," he said. "In the meantime, you can shower and rest." "I'll make us something to eat." The three nodded, still cautious but clearly relieved to be somewhere safe and dry. While the girls settled in the room, Caleb made a few quick calls, one to Ellen, his secretary, asking her to cancel all his commitments for the rest of the day and the following day. Another to Sandra, briefly explaining the situation and asking for her help buying clothes and basic items for the girls. In the kitchen, he prepared sandwiches, cut fruit, and found cookies and milk. It wasn't the most sophisticated meal, but he guessed it would be more comforting and familiar to them than anything fancy. When the triplets emerged, they were completely transformed. Wet, combed hair, their faces clean and revealing freckles once hidden by grime. They wore some of his oversized t-shirts, which looked like dresses on their small frames. "It looks delicious," June said, eyeing the table. "Help yourselves," Caleb replied, gesturing to the chairs. They sat down, politely waiting for him to join before they began eating. Their table manners were impeccable, he noticed. They had clearly been raised well. During the meal, they gradually relaxed. Mira even smiled when Caleb put more cookies on the table. June shared how they made chocolate truffles to sell. Nora asked about his work, listening carefully as he gave simplified explanations about running a company. It was both strange and natural at the same time, like discovering a space in his life that he hadn't realized was missing, finally being filled. After dinner, while the girls watched a cartoon on the living room TV, probably their first normal entertainment in months, Sandra arrived with shopping bags, children's basics, toothbrushes, kids' shampoo, and even a few books and small toys. "You're a good man, Caleb Mercer," she said quietly, watching the triplets engrossed in the cartoon. "I always knew that." Caleb just smiled, grateful for her efficiency and discretion. Once Sandra left, he organized the items and called the girls over to show them. "These are for us," Mira asked, looking wide-eyed at a pink unicorn print pajama. "All for you," he confirmed, "to use while you're here." Again, that silent exchange between them. A communication that he had grown to admire deeply. "Thank you," Nora said, speaking for them all. There was a certain dignity in her gratitude, a poise beyond her years. When bedtime finally came, Caleb showed them how the sofa bed worked, creating more space for everyone. To his surprise, they preferred to sleep together on the main bed. "We always sleep together," June explained. "It's warmer." "And less scary," Mira added. Caleb nodded, understanding. He helped them settle, made sure they had water, and left a dim hallway light on. "I'm just down the hall," he said. "If you need anything during the night, just call." "Caleb?" Nora asked as he stood in the doorway. "This is just for tonight, right?" "Until the rain stops." He looked at the three of them, now in clean pajamas, hair brushed, their faces peaceful for the first time since he'd met them. He saw in their eyes a cautious hope, the fear of trusting mixed with the desperate need to do exactly that. "For now, it's just until the rain stops," he answered carefully. "But tomorrow we can talk about what comes next." They nodded, seemingly satisfied with the honest answer. No empty promises, no false assurances, just truth and the possibility of something better. "Good night, Nora, June, Mira," he said gently. "Good night, Caleb," they replied in unison. Later, when he passed quietly by the half-open door to check on them, all three were sound asleep, curled up together in the large bed. Their faces, so identical yet so distinct, were relaxed in slumber, their worries temporarily erased. In that moment, seeing them safe for the first time in months, Caleb knew with absolute certainty he would do anything to protect these children. The path ahead would be complicated, full of legal and emotional challenges, but he was determined. The Whitlow triplets had found not just a roof but a defender, and maybe one day a home. A week had passed since the Whitlow triplets started living with Caleb. A week of adjustments, discoveries, and small victories. The girls still slept together in the same bed, but now they could spend a few hours apart without panicking. Nora had shown interest in the business books in Caleb's library. June revealed a natural talent for cooking, enthusiastically helping with meals. And Mira, the quietest of the three, began humming as she drew, perhaps a sign she felt safe enough to express herself. It was a temporary arrangement, Caleb knew. Richard was handling the legal aspects, investigating guardianship options, and searching for any relatives who might take responsibility. But for now, they had a home, and he, surprisingly, had a family. On that Sunday morning, the apartment was quiet. The girls were still asleep, exhausted after a trip to the zoo the previous day. Caleb was making coffee in the kitchen, savoring the calm moment to gather his thoughts. There were important decisions to be made. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. He checked the clock, 8:17 a.m. Too early for visitors, especially on a Sunday. When he opened the door, it felt like time rewound. Vivian stood in the hallway, immaculate in a light blue dress that highlighted her eyes. Her hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, red lipstick defining her lips, exactly as she had looked the first time he saw her at that hotel bar nearly 7 months ago. But now, looking at her, Caleb felt nothing but a vague sense of unreality, as if he were seeing a photograph of something that once mattered, but now belonged to another life. "Caleb," she said softly, her voice with that melodic tone he once found enchanting. "May I come in?" He hesitated. The girls were still asleep. The last thing he wanted was to expose them to another encounter with Vivian. "This isn't a good time," he replied. "Please," she insisted, and for the first time, he noticed something different in her expression, a vulnerability he had never seen before. "We need to talk. I'm sorry." Caleb studied her for a moment. Part of him wanted to just close the door, ending that chapter without further words. But another part, perhaps the more sensible, knew this confrontation was necessary, a definitive closure. 5 minutes, he said finally, opening the door wider. In the living room, she entered, glancing around as though searching for changes in the apartment she once knew so well. Her gaze landed briefly on a child's drawing pinned to the fridge, a colorful rainbow signed by Mira, but she made no comment. In the living room, Caleb did not offer her a seat. He remained standing, keeping a deliberate distance. Vivian noticed, her face showing slight surprise before resuming its controlled expression. "I tried contacting you many times," she began. "You didn't answer my messages or calls." "There was nothing to say," he responded simply. "Caleb, I know you're hurt about what happened at the church. Those girls ruined what should have been the happiest day of our lives, but we can start over. I know we can get past this." She took a step toward him, hand extended as if to touch him. Caleb stepped back slightly. "This isn't about getting past it, Vivian. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about my previous marriage," she continued, ignoring his response. "It was a lapse in judgment. I should have been honest from the start. But I was afraid of losing you, afraid that if you knew about Thomas, you'd judge me." There was a cunning in her partial admission that might once have worked on him, admitting to a lesser mistake to hide a bigger one, forging a shortcut to forgiveness through a half-truth. "Thomas Whitlow," Caleb said calmly, "a university professor, father of triplets, a widower. Died of heart complications 8 months ago." Vivian paled slightly but recovered quickly. "Yes, he was my husband. A brief and unhappy marriage I preferred to forget. That's why I never mentioned it." "Helen Whitlow," Caleb went on, as if she hadn't spoken. "Thomas's first wife, mother of Nora, June, and Mira. Died of cancer 3 years ago. Caleb, why are we talking about this? It's in the past. I'm here to talk about us, about our future. Martin Reynolds," he continued mercilessly, "your first husband, a businessman, also a widower when you met. He died 6 months later of natural causes, leaving you a substantial inheritance." This time, Vivian couldn't hide her shock. Her mask of control visibly cracked. "How did you—" "I know everything, Vivian," Caleb said, his voice firmer now. "I hired an investigator. I read reports, saw documents, certificates. I spoke to people who knew you, who knew Thomas." "You investigated me?" she asked, her voice indignant. "What right do you have?" "The same right 3 small children had to interrupt our wedding so I wouldn't make the worst mistake of my life." A tense silence fell between them. Outside, the sounds of a Sunday morning in the city created a surreal contrast with the confrontation in the apartment. "So that's it?" she asked finally. "Are you going to believe 3 troubled girls and old stories dug up by some second-rate detective?" "Those troubled girls are asleep in my guest room," Caleb replied calmly. "They've been here for a week. They're slowly learning to trust adults again, starting to smile, to act like children." Vivian stood still, absorbing this. For a moment, something like guilt or fear flashed across her face. Then, as always, her mask slid back into place. "You can't keep them," she said, her tone almost threatening. "You have no legal right. If anyone finds out, you'll be in trouble." "I'm aware of the legal complexities," he said, still calm. "Richard is handling it. Meanwhile, they have a safe place to stay, food to eat, and an adult who listens to them." "You're throwing away everything we built because of a sad story?" she asked, shifting tactics. Her voice was now soft, almost trembling. "I made a mistake, Caleb, I admit that. But everyone makes mistakes, everyone. Haven't you ever made mistakes?" He observed her with a clarity he hadn't had before. Vivian was a consummate actress, molding herself to others' expectations. With Thomas, she was likely the devoted wife a widower with small children needed. With Martin, the understanding partner for a lonely man. And with him, Caleb, she'd been the strong, independent woman who fit neatly into his organized life. "Abandoning 3 small children on the street after their father dies isn't a mistake, Vivian," he said, each word weighted with truth. "It's a choice, one that shows who you really are." "I didn't abandon anyone," she insisted, but the tremor in her voice betrayed the lie. "They had somewhere to go. There was a plan." "What plan?" Caleb asked. "Putting their clothes in plastic bags on the porch, locking them out, selling the house and never looking back." moving to another city and pretending they never existed. You don't understand, she began, her tone pleading now. I understand perfectly, he cut in. You see people as stepping stones, Vivian. You use them while they're useful, then discard them when they become inconvenient. Thomas and his daughters, probably Martin before them. And I would have been next. That's not fair, she burst out, finally losing her composure. I loved you. You loved what I represented, Caleb corrected. Security, stability, status, the same things you sought with your other husbands. But love? Love is sticking around when it's hard. It's taking responsibility. It's putting others first, once in a while. You never learned to do that. A soft sound from the hallway drew both their attention. Mira stood at the entrance, her wide eyes fixed on Vivian. Behind her, Nora and June appeared, pale but resolute. Vivian's face changed when she saw them. All pretense of regret vanished, replaced by a cold anger Caleb had never witnessed before. So this is it, she said, her voice now metallic. You'd rather keep 3 burdens who aren't even yours than build a life with me. They're not burdens, he answered, subtly stepping between Vivian and the girls. They're children, brave, resilient children who survived the worst you could do. Vivian looked at him with contempt, then at the triplets. For a moment, Caleb feared she would say something cruel, something that would hurt these children even more. But she simply grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. You'll regret this, she said, her hand on the doorknob. No, Caleb replied with absolute certainty. I'm going to take care of what you threw away. And one day, when I look back, I'll realize this was the moment my life really began. Vivian hesitated, as if wanting to say something else. But faced with Caleb's unwavering gaze and the silent dignity of the 3 identical girls watching her, she simply left Isa, shutting the door behind her. The sound echoed through the apartment, closing a chapter, ending a story that should never have happened. Caleb turned to the girls, kneeling down to their level. Are you okay? He asked gently. All 3 nodded, that silent communication passing among them. She's not coming back, Mira asked in a small voice. No, Caleb assured her. That door is closed forever. Nora, the most mature of the 3, looked at him with her wise beyond her years eyes. What about us? Do we have to leave too? Caleb looked at those 3 identical faces, each carrying its own story, its own pain, its own hope. And he knew with a certainty he had never felt before, exactly where he belonged. No, he answered firmly. You stay for as long as you want, for as long as you need. And as the triplets wrapped their small arms around him, offering a warmth he never imagined he deserved, Caleb understood that some doors must close so that others, far more important, can open. The presence of the triplets brought a new dynamic to Caleb's life. His apartment, once sterile and overly organized, now glowed with warmth it had never known. Their drawings brightened the refrigerator, tiny shoes lined up by the door, laughter echoed in hallways that had only known silence. After Vivian's visit and their final confrontation, Caleb felt a chapter had closed, but another, far more important, was just beginning. The girls had been with him for nearly 2 weeks, slowly adapting to a life of relative normalcy, sleeping in comfortable beds, eating regular meals, wearing clean clothes. Little by little, they were becoming children again, not mini-adults forced to survive on the streets. Still, Caleb knew the situation was delicate. Legally, he had no rights over them. Their presence in his apartment could be questioned by social services at any moment, and though he had the means to provide material comfort, he wondered if he could give them everything 3 traumatized children needed. With these concerns on his mind, he met Richard at his office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. We need a more permanent plan, Caleb said, looking out the window at the rain. They deserve stability, a proper family structure. Richard nodded. I agree. What do you have in mind? I want you to broaden the investigation, Caleb answered. Look for close relatives on Thomas's side and Helen's. Anyone who might take legal custody. What if we don't find anyone? Richard asked pragmatically. Caleb turned to face him, determination in his eyes. Then I'll do it myself. I'll do whatever it takes. Adoption, legal guardianship, Whatever's possible. Richard gave a faint smile. I never thought I'd see Caleb Mercer, the ruthless businessman, taking on the role of a father. Neither did I, Caleb admitted, but life surprises us sometimes. I'll put my best team on it, Richard promised, jotting notes. Meanwhile, I suggest you start documenting everything. The girls' condition when you found them, their progress, any relevant details, just in case we need to build a custody case for you. Already started. Sandra's helping me with that. They discussed a few more practical matters before parting. At the door, Richard placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Regardless of how this turns out, what you're doing for these children is admirable. I'm just trying to fix something that was broken, Caleb replied. They deserve a second chance. The following days settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Caleb rearranged his schedule to be home with the girls as much as possible. Sandra, who turned out to have a natural rapport with children, came by daily to help whenever he had unavoidable meetings. The triplets responded well to structure. Nora, the most mature, took on small household tasks, as if she needed to feel useful. June's interest in cooking grew, and she began preparing simple meals under Sandra's supervision. Mira, the most sensitive of the three, started talking more, though she was still the quietest. One afternoon, while Caleb was working at the makeshift desk in the living room, Mira quietly approached him with one of the children's books Sandra had brought. "Can you read to me?" she asked, her small voice firm but gentle. Caleb felt a tug in his chest. It was the first time any of them asked him directly for something. "Of course," he said, pushing his documents aside and making room on the couch. She sat next to him, not too close, but close enough to see the illustrations. As he began reading, he noticed the other two triplets peeking in from the doorway. Gradually, as if testing unfamiliar waters, they came closer. June sitting cross-legged on the floor, Nora on the armchair, pretending to be interested in another book. Mid-story, Caleb's phone rang. It was Richard. "Can I call you back in a few minutes?" Caleb asked, looking at Mira. "I'm in the middle of something important." "Actually, I think you'll want to take this," Richard insisted, his tone urgent. "We've found someone." Caleb felt a chill. "The girls are here with me. Can you email me the info? I'll get back to you as soon as I can." "Sure, it's on its way." Ending the call, Caleb turned to Mira, who watched him with attentive eyes. "Where were we?" he asked, picking up the book again. An hour later, with the girls busy playing a board game in the kitchen, Caleb finally checked his email. Richard's message was direct, containing an attachment. "We located Marianne Whitlow, Thomas's younger sister. She lives in Oak Ridge, about 2 hours away. She's a literature professor at a local university. Single, no children. Attached is a brief report with her contact information and what we've discovered about her. She seems stable and well-established. We spoke briefly by phone. She didn't know Thomas had daughters, and she was visibly shaken by news of his passing. She expressed immediate interest in meeting her nieces." Caleb opened the attachment, studying every line carefully. Marianne Whitlow, 42, Ph.D. in English Literature, Associate Professor at Oak Ridge State University for over a decade. No criminal record, financially stable, well-respected in her profession. There were photos too, a woman with reddish-brown hair and clear eyes reminiscent of Thomas's in the pictures, with a serious but kind expression, a blood relative, an aunt the girls never knew they had. Caleb closed his laptop, feeling a complex mix of relief. They had family after all, and apprehension about what that meant for the future. And, surprisingly, a pang of sadness at the thought of seeing them leave. That night, after the girls were in bed, Caleb dialed Marianne Whitlow's number. "Hello," answered a woman's voice, gentle yet firm. "Marianne Whitlow, my name is Caleb Mercer. Richard Harrington, my lawyer, spoke with you recently about your brother Thomas." A brief pause. "Yes, Mr. Mercer. I've been expecting your call. I'd like to talk in person if possible. It's a delicate matter." "I understand," she replied. "In fact, I was planning to come to the city tomorrow. Could we meet?" They agreed on a time and place, a quiet cafe near Caleb's apartment, early in the afternoon. After ending the call, he stayed up late, wondering how he'd explain it all to Marianne, and harder still, how he'd tell the girls they had an aunt they never knew existed. The cafe they chose was discreet and cozy, with well-spaced tables for private conversations. Caleb arrived 15 minutes early, picking a table in a quiet corner. He ordered only black coffee, which he left untouched as he waited. He recognized Marianne Whitlow the moment she walked in. She had the same dignified air as in the photos, but in person, there was a softer quality to her features that pictures didn't capture. She wore simple yet elegant clothes, dark pants, a peach silk blouse, a light coat. Her grayish-blue eyes scanned the room until they found Caleb. He stood to greet her. "Mrs. Whitlow, thank you for coming." "Marianne, please," she replied, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm, confident. A waitress approached, and Marianne ordered tea. Once they were alone again, she got right to the point. "The lawyer told me my brother passed away 8 months ago, and that he left daughters, triplets, now in your care." Caleb nodded. "It's complicated. I think you need the full story to understand." Over the next hour, Caleb explained everything: how he'd met Vivian, the near wedding, the dramatic interruption by the triplets, the subsequent investigation, finding the girls in the park, and ultimately taking them in. He deliberately omitted some of the darkest details about Vivian, focusing on the girls and their current situation. Marianne listened quietly, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. Her eyes filled with tears when Caleb described the condition in which he'd found her nieces, but she kept herself composed. "Thomas had daughters," she said at last, her voice low and emotional, "and I didn't even know." "The girls mentioned their father spoke little of his family," Caleb offered carefully. Marianne sighed, a sad smile on her lips. "That doesn't surprise me. We had a serious falling out almost 10 years ago, over issues that seem trivial now." She took a sip of her tea, probably cold by now, before continuing. "Our mother passed away, leaving the family home. Thomas wanted to sell it. I insisted on keeping it. The argument escalated, harsh words were exchanged. Pride kept us from reconciling, and the years just went by." She shook her head. "Such a waste of precious time." "You never knew about his first marriage to Helen?" Caleb asked. "We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, formal notes. He mentioned he'd married twice, but we lost complete contact after that. I moved to Oak Ridge, got immersed in academic life." She looked at Caleb, her gaze steady. "So he married this woman, Vivian, and when he died, she just abandoned the girls." The indignation in her voice was palpable. "Yes," Caleb confirmed. "She literally left them on the street." Marianne closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the cruelty of such an act. When she opened them again, there was determination in her gaze. "I want to meet them," she said, "if they'll let me." "They don't know about you yet," Caleb explained. "I thought it best to talk to you first, to understand your intentions." "My intentions?" She seemed to consider the question. "Honestly, Mr. Mercer..." "Caleb, please." "Caleb, honestly, I'm still processing all of this, finding out my brother passed away, that I have 3 nieces I never knew, that they've suffered so much." She paused, voice trembling slightly. "But I know I want to be in their lives, if they'll have me. They're my family, all that's left of my brother." "I understand this might be a difficult decision," Caleb said. "Taking on 3 children at once, I'm aware of the commitment," she replied with a calm that impressed him. "I have a large house in Oak Ridge, a stable job with flexible hours and substantial savings. Financially, I can offer stability. Emotionally..." She hesitated. "Well, I imagine we'll all have a lot to learn from each other." Caleb studied her carefully. There was a sincerity in her that was impossible to fake, a quiet strength that reminded him of Nora, the oldest triplet. "Would you like to meet them tomorrow?" he finally asked. "At my apartment, where they feel safe. No pressure, just a first introduction." Marianne nodded, clearly moved. "I'd love to. And thank you for everything you've done for them, Caleb. Taking responsibility for 3 children you didn't even know. Not many people would show that kind of compassion. They saved me as much as I saved them," he answered simply. As they said their goodbyes at the cafe door, Caleb felt a renewed sense of hope. Marianne Whitlow seemed genuine in her desire to know her nieces. in her willingness to reconnect with the family she had almost lost forever. There was a real chance here, not just for the girls to have a home, but to belong, to share blood ties and a family history. On the way back to his apartment, Caleb thought about how he would share the news with the triplets, how to explain they had an aunt they never knew, that someone in the world was connected to them by more than just circumstance. He was ready for the possibility that the girls might eventually go live with Marianne. He didn't expect the depth of emotion that thought stirred in him, joy that they had found family, and a surprising sadness at the idea of letting them go. One day at a time, he murmured to himself as he parked. First, they need to meet her. He headed up to the apartment where Sandra and the triplets waited for dinner. Looking at those three identical faces, the uniqueness in each revealed more every day, Caleb felt a deep certainty. No matter what happened next, these children had changed his life forever. And maybe, just maybe, he had changed theirs too. The morning of the meeting dawned sunny, as though the sky itself conspired to make the moment special. Caleb had explained to the girls the night before, choosing simple, direct words without raising their hopes too high. "I found out you have an aunt," he said, while they watched him with identical, wide eyes. "Your dad's sister. She didn't know you existed, just like you didn't know about her. She really wants to meet you." Their reactions were as complex as he'd anticipated. Nora, the pragmatic one, asked questions: where she lived, why they'd never heard of her, whether she resembled their father. June kept quiet, but her expression showed an internal storm of emotions. Mira gripped Caleb's hand as if afraid this new person would mean losing him. "She's coming tomorrow," Caleb explained. "Just to meet you. Nothing has to be decided right away. Is that okay?" They all nodded, that silent communication passing among them in critical moments. Now, as he tidied up the living room for the third time, Caleb found himself inexplicably nervous. The girls had chosen their nicest clothes, simple dresses Sandra had bought, hair carefully combed. Sitting side by side on the sofa, they looked like three little judges ready to evaluate a critical case. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock. "Remember," Caleb said before opening the door, "you don't have to say or do anything you don't want to. I'll be here the whole time." All three nodded in unison, their expressions serious but curious. Marianne Whitlow stepped into the apartment with hesitant steps, as if entering sacred ground. She wore a simple greenish-blue dress and carried a small paper bag. Her reddish-brown hair was pinned in a loose bun, a few strands escaping around her face. Her grayish-blue eyes locked immediately on the three identical girls on the sofa. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, but filled with possibilities, like the air before a summer rain. "Hello," Marianne finally said, her voice gentle but clear. "My name is Marianne. It's a great pleasure to meet you." The triplets continued to observe her intently, none making the first move to speak. Caleb motioned for Marianne to sit in the armchair across from the sofa. "I brought something I thought you might like to see," she said, pulling an envelope from the bag. "Some old photos." Interest flashed in the girls' eyes, though they remained still. Marianne opened the envelope and placed some pictures on the coffee table, where the children could reach them. "This one is your dad when he was about your age," she explained, pointing to a faded photo of a red-haired boy missing a front tooth. "And this is me, a little younger, in the same yard." Nora was the first to move, leaning slightly forward to examine the pictures. June and Mira followed, 3 pairs of eyes soaking up every detail. "He looks happy," Mira said quietly. "He was," Marianne confirmed with a nostalgic smile. "Thomas loved that yard. We built a treehouse together, right over here." She pointed to a corner in the photo. "Our dad helped with the harder parts, but Thomas insisted on hammering a few boards by himself. He hit his thumb twice." A tiny smile curved June's lips. "Did he like stories?" Nora suddenly asked. "Our dad used to tell us stories before bed every night." Marianne's eyes shimmered with contained tears. "Yes, he loved them, even when he was little. I think that's why he became a literature professor. He could talk about his favorite books for hours." Nora exchanged a glance with her sisters, then, with the poise of someone far older, asked the question they all wanted answered. Are you our dad's sister? Marianne swallowed hard and nodded. A tear slipped down her cheek. Yes, I'm Thomas's sister, your aunt. She brushed away the tear discreetly. I'm so sorry I wasn't in your lives sooner. I didn't know my brother had such wonderful daughters. Why? June asked, her curiosity overriding her reserve. Why didn't you know about us? Marianne glanced briefly at Caleb, as if seeking guidance on how much to reveal. He gave her a subtle nod, encouraging honesty. Your dad and I had a falling out years ago, she explained carefully. A silly argument about our parents' house after our mum passed. We were both stubborn. We stopped talking, and as time went on, it became harder to reach out. Dad never really talked about his family, Nora said, only about Mum sometimes. I imagine it was painful for him, Marianne replied. Thomas was always sensitive, though he tried to hide it. I'm so sorry we wasted so much time on foolish pride. She paused, tears in her eyes again. If I had known, if I had any idea what would happen. Mira, the most intuitive of the three, slipped off the couch and moved closer to Marianne. Very gently, she reached out and touched Marianne's fingers. You look sad, she observed. Marianne smiled through her tears. I'm sad for lost time, but I'm also very happy to finally meet you. Mira's gesture seemed to break an invisible barrier. June scooted closer to examine more photos, picking up one showing teenage Thomas and Marianne with their arms around each other, wearing identical smiles. How you two have the same smile, she commented. People used to say that, Marianne agreed. When we were kids, he hated when they pointed out our similarities. He'd say he was older, so I was the one who looked like him, not the other way around. A small smile tugged at Nora's lips. He still made jokes like that as an adult. That doesn't surprise me at all, Marianne replied. Thomas always had that peculiar sense of humor. For nearly an hour, conversation flowed with growing ease. Marianne shared childhood stories of Thomas, summer mischief, family traditions, little details that the girls devoured like dry soil soaking up rain. In turn, the triplets slowly shared their own memories, how their dad made animal-shaped pancakes on Sundays, read to them every night, took them on long walks where they made up stories about the clouds. At one point, Caleb quietly got up and went to the kitchen, giving them space to let this new bond form. He made coffee for himself, tea for Marianne, and carefully arranged cookies on a plate with unnecessary precision. When he returned to the living room, he saw a scene that tightened his chest. Mira now sat beside Marianne, showing her the drawings she'd made over the past few days. June had perched on the arm of the armchair, commenting on her sister's color choices. Even Nora, ever cautious, had moved closer, her body angled toward her newly discovered aunt. Caleb set the tray on the table quietly, not wanting to interrupt. I'd love for you to see my house in Oakridge sometime, Marianne was saying. There's a big garden, not as pretty as the one your dad and I grew up with, but there's room to plant flowers, to build things, to run around. Are there trees? Mira asked. Plenty, Marianne nodded, including an oak tree just right for a treehouse, if you like that idea. The three girls exchanged glances, that silent language of theirs that Caleb found so fascinating. I'm not trying to rush anything, Marianne continued, noticing their caution. I know we only just met. I know you've been through a lot, and I'm so thankful to Caleb for taking such good care of you. She looked at him with genuine gratitude before turning back to the triplets. But I want you to know I'm here now, to learn who you are, to hear stories about your dad, to be family, if you'll let me. Nora, the unofficial spokesperson, asked the hardest question. Do you want us to go live with you? Marianne paused before answering. I'd love that, eventually, but only when you're ready. If you're ready. Nothing has to be decided today. What if we're never ready? Nora pressed. Then I'll still be part of your lives however I can, Marianne said without hesitation. Visits, phone calls, letters. The most important thing to me is to be here, to know you, to be part of your lives in some way. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Nora looked at her sisters, and again the silent conversation passed among them. Then, in what seemed like a shared decision, Nora reached out and touched Marianne's arm. "You have his eyes," she said simply. It was as though the last barrier had fallen. Marianne smiled through tears that now flowed freely. "Could I hug you?" she asked tentatively. "It's okay if you don't want me to." Mira moved first, sidling closer and gently wrapping her arms around Marianne's waist. June followed, resting her head on their aunt's shoulder. Nora, though always reserved, joined last, but her embrace was no less heartfelt. Caleb watched the scene with a lump in his throat. It was like witnessing the birth of something precious and fragile, a new beginning, a reforged family bond. The four of them on the couch, a woman who'd lost her brother and three girls who'd lost their father, forming an imperfect yet promising circle, a family under reconstruction. Over their heads, Marianne's eyes met Caleb's. They conveyed what words could not: gratitude, hope, and a silent promise to care for these children he had saved, and who, in a way, had saved him, too. A new chapter was beginning for all of them. The morning of their departure was bright and clear, contrasting sharply with the subdued silence in Caleb's apartment. 3 small suitcases were lined up by the door, not too full, since the girls had arrived with almost nothing and were leaving with only a bit more: some clothes, books, and the gifts they'd received over the last few weeks. It had been 3 weeks since that first meeting with Marianne, 3 whirlwind weeks of frequent visits, lunches and outings, a time for mutual recognition and reconstruction of family ties none knew existed. The decision to move in with Marianne had come naturally, without pressure. Oakridge wasn't far. There would be a large bedroom for the girls, a good nearby school, and most importantly, the permanence of a real home with someone who shared their blood. Logically, it was perfect, but the heart rarely follows logic. June was in the kitchen, making a last special breakfast for everyone, pancakes shaped like animals, as their father used to do. Nora was systematically arranging the books Caleb had given them, choosing which to take and which to leave behind for future visits. Mira sat quietly on the couch, hugging the small teddy bear Sandra had given her on their second day. Caleb moved through the apartment, double-checking nothing was left behind, talking more than usual to fill the heavy silence. "Remember to call me as soon as you arrive," he kept saying, fiddling pointlessly with a suitcase handle. "And next weekend I'll come visit like we planned. Maybe we can go to that park Marianne mentioned, the one with the lake." Nora nodded without looking up from her books. "We'll call you every day." The intercom buzzed, announcing Marianne's arrival. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. A quiet current seemed to pass through everyone. The reality of leaving, until then, an abstract future event, became concrete. "She's on her way up," Caleb said after answering. His voice sounded oddly hoarse in his own ears. The triplets looked at each other, another silent exchange. Then, as if responding to an invisible signal, they all approached him. "We made something for you," Nora said, handing him a clumsily wrapped package. Caleb took it and carefully opened it. Inside was a framed drawing, 3 identical girls holding hands with a tall figure. In the background, a shining sun and a house. "So you won't forget us," June explained. "As if that were possible," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. A knock on the door signaled Marianne's arrival. When Caleb opened it, she entered with a warm smile, though her eyes betrayed that she, too, understood the complexity of the moment. "Ready, girls?" she asked gently. All 3 nodded, though none of them moved right away. Marianne turned to Caleb, gratitude evident. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you did for them, for bringing them back into my life." "There's nothing to thank me for," he replied. "They saved me, not the other way around." Marianne smiled, Howman understanding. Then she naturally began picking up the small suitcases. "The car is downstairs. We can stop for a snack along the way if you'd like." And so the moment had come. The triplets stood still for a moment, as if absorbing every detail of the apartment that had been their safe haven these past weeks. Then Mira, the most emotional of the 3, ran to Caleb and hugged him tightly. "I don't want to go," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. June and Nora joined the hug, forming a small circle around him. Caleb knelt and holding them just as firmly, finally allowing himself to feel the pain of letting go. "I'll miss you so much," he said, no longer hiding the emotion in his voice. "But this isn't goodbye. It's just see you soon." "Will you visit us?" June asked, her face tear-streaked. He looked each of them in the eye. "Definitely. I'll always be around. Whenever you need me, I'll be there. That's a promise." They nodded, believing him completely. Trust in adults slowly rebuilt after so many losses. "It's time to go, sweethearts," Marianne said gently. "Caleb is welcome to visit any time, and you can call him every day if you like." With one last round of tight hugs, the girls finally followed Marianne out of the apartment. In the hallway, Nora turned back one last time. "Thank you for everything," she said with that dignified tone she always had, despite her tears. "You changed our lives, and you changed mine," he answered, smiling through his own tears. From the living room window, Caleb watched them climb into Marianne's car. The triplets waved as the vehicle pulled away, their identical silhouettes growing smaller until they disappeared around the corner. The silence that fell over the apartment was almost tangible. The echoes of children's laughter, their whispered nighttime conversations, their light footsteps in the hallway, all replaced by a quiet that vibrated with recent memories. Caleb walked slowly through the place, touching objects that reminded him of them. A forgotten hair ribbon, a children's book on the shelf, the drawing on the fridge they hadn't taken. He sat on the couch, looking at the framed picture they had given him. For the first time in a long while, he was truly alone. Yet strangely, he didn't feel empty, because some people enter our lives briefly, but change our hearts forever. He stood and pulled the curtains wide, letting sunlight flood the living room. Outside, a new day was unfolding, bright, full of possibility, and somewhere along the road to Oak Ridge, a new family was beginning its journey. Deep in Caleb's chest, despite the ache of absence, there was a profound serenity, the peace that comes from doing what's right rather than what's easy, from having the courage to open your heart, even when you know you'll eventually have to let go. Because in the end, the heart remembers not only those who stay, but all those who, in some way, help us become who we are. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.